I am doing some cooking tutorials for some of the mainstays of the GAPS intro diet, which is basically a gut microbiome reset and rebuilding diet. And it works to rebuild the gut lining, to rebalance the microbiome, to rebuild the enteric nervous system, the nervous system that grows in our gut lining, which then connects to the nervous system and the rest of our body, and basically repair the gut-brain connection. So it's used for a variety of immune-related disorders, such as autoimmunity, allergies, asthma, things like that, but then also a lot of neurological conditions, learning disabilities, mental health issues, things like that. So the diet really focuses on using traditional foods, foods that have been used as healing substances for thousands of years. It really goes back to the basics. And so one of the absolute most important part of the healing components of the GAPS diet is meat stock. And meat stock is different than bone broth. Bone broth is, unfortunately, considered to be like the prime food for healing the gut. And bone broth is actually better at maintaining gut health once your gut is already repaired. The reason is that bone broth is cooked for a long time, usually 12 to 24, maybe even 36, 48 hours, depending on the preference. And when you cook bones for that long, you extract a huge amount of minerals and amino acids. And it creates not only a very mineral-rich broth, but it also creates a certain ratio of amino acids, very high in glutamate, which the high amount of minerals can actually be irritating to a damaged gut lining. There's so many minerals in it that it can actually irritate the gut lining if it's already damaged as opposed to heal it. And the high amount of glutamate in terms of the amino acid composition is actually often causes a lot of reactions to people who have a compromised nervous system. A lot of times you hear about MSG being an irritant to people with things like ADHD and autism and mental health issues, emotional instability, things like that. And that's because that's a synthetic form of the amino acid glutamate, and it's a very stimulating amino acid. It has a very activating effect in the brain, which isn't a bad thing inherently, but if your body is already, if your nervous system and your brain is already kind of on fire, right, overactive, it can actually exacerbate psychiatric and neurological symptoms. The other thing is that bone broth is extremely high in histamine, which again is not inherently a bad thing, but a lot of people with immune system related disorders already have a lot of histamine floating around in their body. And if you're consuming something that's extremely high in its histamine content, again, it's very activating, it's very stimulating, and it's very inflammatory. And if your body is already in that state, it's not necessarily helpful. So instead of bone broth, for the first stages of the GAPS diet, we use meat stock, which is more of a traditional meat broth, which is only cooked for a few hours. It's cooked usually from 1 to 5 hours, depending on what you're doing. 1 hour if it's seafood, 2 hours if it's chicken, 3-4 hours if it's beef or lamb. This creates a lower mineral content. There's still really good minerals, really healing minerals in it. But it's going to be a lower content of minerals that is not as irritating for the gut lining, and it's going to have a different ratio of amino acids when you only cook it for that long. And also because we are not just using bones. For bone broth, you just use the bones. For meat stock, you want to use bones and meat together. And so unfortunately, it is harder to find these days bone-in cuts of meat because people find it annoying. They don't want to pay for the bone. They have to cut it off anyway. And so people are always looking for meat, cuts of meat without the bone. But it's actually extremely healing to eat the connective tissue that is that connects the the bones and the meat together. All those tendons and collagenous tissues that connect the bones and the meat are actually the most healing part of the meat. And so it's really important to find those bone-in cuts. And then cook those just for a short time. And that's going to be much higher in an amino acid called glycine. And glycine actually has a down-regulating effect. It has a calming effect on the body. It's a precursor to GABA, which is the neurotransmitter that makes us just feel like super chill and zen and relaxed about things and able to just kind of laugh off stress. And just people who are just like real easygoing and mellow, they have a good amount of GABA in their body, and that's made from glycine, which is the amino acid that you more predominantly get when you short cook the collagenous tissues of meat and bones together. The other thing about glycine is that it's very important as a nutrient that the liver uses to detoxify. So all the different stages of detoxification in the liver require different nutrients, and glycine is a really important one for that process. And so when you're getting so much glycine in the food that you're eating, in the meat stock that you're eating, it kind of puts that detoxification system really working overtime, and it can really help your body just kind of spontaneously start to detoxify. This happens for a lot of people when they start the intro GAPS diet, is they just start spontaneously releasing toxins. And part of that is because of the high glycine content of the food that they're eating. Glycine, interestingly enough, it sounds like glyphosate, right? And that's because it's actually kind of similar in chemical structure. Really interesting. So there is some evidence that glyphosate, which is Roundup, right, a really toxic pesticide that is used a lot, especially in the United States, it actually replaces glycine in our DNA, in our tissues. And this is a major component in a lot of chronic illnesses and high amounts of toxicity that people are carrying around in their bodies. So when we have a low glycine but high glyphosate diet, because we're just exposed to it in our world, but especially if we're not eating organic food and produce and meat and dairy and things like that, and honestly, it's even gets into the soil of organic food as well, unfortunately, just because it's so pervasive. So if we have that, we get really toxic with glyphosate because it kind of locks into the tissues in the way that glycine would. But if we bring a bunch of glycine into the diet, it can start to dislodge that, and we start to detoxify glyphosate that we may have accumulated in our body. So there's all sorts of reasons that I described why we want to do meat stock and not bone broth in the early stages of healing the gut, and especially if we're going to be doing the GAPS intro diet. The entire GAPS intro diet is based around the consumption of meat stock. In fact, every single meal, generally for the first month at minimum, that you are doing a gut rebuilding diet or a GAPS style diet, you're going to be eating meat stock for every meal. So I'm going to show you guys how to do it. I'll show you the tools you need first. First, you need a big soup pot. So I am traveling right now and I didn't have one of these, so I just went to Walmart and I got a stainless steel stock pot. It was really cheap, and you can get much bigger. If you are cooking for a whole family or you only have the energy to cook for yourself once a week, you want to get a huge soup pot. The one that I used when I was really sick and I was doing this diet to recover was massive. And I actually had to have my roommates and partners and mom at the time help me maneuver it around a lot because it was too heavy for me because I was so weak at the time. But what I could do is I could cook a huge amount of meat stock and then keep it in the freezer or the fridge and just drink it through the week. But because I'm traveling right now, I didn't want to haul around a huge soup pot, so I just got a smaller one. And if you're just one person and you're able to cook most days, then you just need a small one. But basically, get a stock pot that is as big as you need in order for to be able to make the amount of stock that you need. Now, some people start the optimal amount of meat stock to be eating per day while you're in the initial stages of healing is 6 cups. And that sounds like a lot. It is. And honestly, that is too much for a lot of people. A lot of people, their detoxification is so intense, their die-off reaction and their kind of Herx reaction, a lot of people call it, is so intense that they get really sick if they try to do that much stock right away. So I always tell people just start with a cup. For some people who have really bad histamine disorders and things like that, you might even start with like a 1/4 cup a day and slowly work up. So you can start wherever you need to, but ideally you want to work up to 6 cups a day. That's really the magic number. Okay, so you've got your big stock pot. You really don't need a whole lot for this. You need a stovetop, and you need filtered water. I mean, obviously do what you can, but filtered water is really ideal because the chlorine, well, there's a lot of things that may be problematic in unfiltered water, but my primary concern would be the chlorine. Because we are trying to heal the gut, and the chlorine it's an antibiotic basically, right? It's a sterilizing agent, and so that's going to actually be detrimental to your microbiome in your gut. You know, it's kind of like taking a little dose of antibiotics every day, and that's not good for you. So we want to make sure we have water that has had the chlorine filtered out of it, and then we want, like I said, a cut of meat that has the bones and meat together. So this could be a whole chicken. This could be like seafood scraps. This could be, what else could it be? It could be like bone-in roasts. It could be like a whole like pack of chicken wings, or the whole chicken legs or turkey legs or duck legs, right? It could be shanks. It could be like lamb shanks, something like that. So I got, probably the one that's easiest to find in most stores is going to be like the cross-cut beef shanks. But you can do any type of meat. Now, in terms of quality of meat, I always tell people do what you can afford. But like I said before, with the issue with like glyphosate and antibiotics and other things, you know, you do want to get the highest quality that you can afford. So ideally, you do want to get organic meat and grass-fed if possible. Okay, so you can see why this is helpful, because it has all that connective tissue on it, right? So you got a little bit of marrow in here, in the bone, which is going to be really nutritious, and you've got all this connective kind of collagenous tissue that connects the meat to the bone, and then you have the meat as well, and you're going to eat this in the meat stock when you're done cooking it. Alright, so then you're going to put the meat in the pot, and then you are going to fill the pot with filtered water. And I have some over here, so we carry this big stainless steel 7-gallon container around with us wherever we go, so that we always have clean water, even when we're in apartments or places that don't have filtered water. And you definitely want to put enough in to cover the meat. Now, in GAP's tutorials, you will hear, you know, like 1 quart for every pound of meat, so that you make a really thick, gelatinous stock. But as I said before, that might actually be too much for you when you first start. The thicker it is, the more powerful it's going to be, and that's too much for some people. So, it's okay to add more water and make it thicker. Some people say keep it the same thickness of stock and just do less of it and then slowly increase. I tend to like my stock a little bit thinner and just drink more of it, but it's really up to you. Hey, look at that. You can still put fresh herbs in for the flavor and the medicinal compounds in the herbs. Now, if you are really having some neurological or psychiatric difficulties, sometimes you will react to those compounds in plants. There are a lot of irritating compounds in plants that a lot of people with neurological and psychiatric issues actually react to. And so if you're in your early stages of healing and you have one of those issues, you just want to probably just do plain meat stock without anything added, just salt. People who are the most compromised actually will do this part of the diet carnivore and add in plants as they recover, but many people can start with plants. It just depends on your symptoms and your level of illness. Okay, so I'm using fresh basil. I really like that flavor, but I'm going to strain them out after I'm done. Okay, so then what you want to do is you want to put a top on, and then you are going to turn. Oh, I forgot salt. Let me get the salt. So it's really important to not use refined white table salt when you are healing. Actually, ever. It's terrible stuff because they refine all the trace minerals out of it. And so this is what causes high blood pressure from salt, right? And mineral imbalances from salt because you should never be eating just sodium by itself. So if you get any kind of unrefined salt, that's going to be best, and you can get from the cheapest just like Himalayan pink salt that you would get at like a Walmart or something like that to like the super fancy, you know, mineral salts or Celtic sea salts that you can get at more specialty stores. It doesn't really matter. It's actually a good idea to switch up your salt once in a while so you get a different array of trace minerals with your salt. And I was in a small town where there was only a Walmart when I needed salt, so I just got this basic Himalayan pink salt. But I will get the fancier salt sometimes when I have access to it. So you just put a bit in, and you can always add more salt later. When you are doing a healing protocol, your body does often waste salt because you're detoxifying so much that your body actually will get really dehydrated. And it's not actually water that hydrates you, it's minerals, right? It's electrolytes that hydrates you. So you need to definitely eat more salt than you're used to when you're on a protocol like this. I recommend a tablespoon a day minimum, and that can be in food, in water, however you want to get it in. But I just put a little bit in here to start, and then I'll probably add more when I'm eating it. I have gotten used to eating my food really salty because I found it made me feel a lot better when I was really sick, and I still find, even though I'm healthy now, I still find I do better when I have a very high amount of salt in my diet. All the scum that rises to the top as it cooks, that's going to be the impurities in the meat. Could be just toxins that is in the meat. You know, everything has toxins in it, so you just want to pull those out. You can use a skimmer, you can use a fork, you can use a spoon, whatever is best, and then you can strain it to get the herb leaves out or the peppercorns out if you've used that, and to separate the stock from the meat. And you would pour it into mason jars. If you're doing some kind of a healing diet, mason jars are a must in terms of supplies. So you can strain the stock into jars so you have it separate. And then if you have a lot of histamine issues, you want to keep it stored in the freezer. If you don't, then you can store it in the fridge. And in the fridge, it'll stay good for about a week. Maybe a little longer, but I would say about a week to be safe. And then you just drink it daily as your meals, and you store the meat that was cooked in the stock in a separate bowl or container, glass preferably, or ceramic, and then you add that to your soups. And you can add vegetables too. Like I said, people who are most compromised usually want to do this part of the initial stages of the gut repair carnivore because they may just react to any kind of plant matter. But if you are tolerating some amount of plants okay, you want to add low fiber, no starch vegetables into your soup. So this is going to be things like broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, carrot, onion, garlic, things like that. You want to take out all the fibrous stems and just use the low fiber soft parts, and you want to cook them really well. Ideally you want to braise them or simmer them or steam them. You can do that in the soup. Some people like to do it all together. Some people would be chopping up veggies right now and adding it straight to the stock while it cooks. I actually prefer to keep all the components separate so I can kind of build my own soups when I want to. That's my preference. So I will be, tomorrow morning when I'm making my soup, I will be chopping up my veggies of choice, and I will just be kind of braising them or simmering them in a little bit of the stock. to make my breakfast, and then adding pieces of the meat that I cooked in the stock last night. So that's how you kind of build your meals when you're doing this introductory level of GAPS or gut repair work. So yeah, I'm just going to wait for this to boil, and then I'm going to turn it down to a simmer and wait for 3 hours and then put it away like I said. Alright, so that's my tutorial on meat stock.